Field by field, Mazex is bringing Canadian seed to farmers across Canada. Mazex is your source for high-performance soybeans and grain, silage, and grazing corn hybrids. Visit mazex.com to find your local Mazex representative.
I'm Shaun Haney, and this is RealAg on the Weekend. Let's get real and get connected with the week that was in Canadian agriculture. RealAg on the Weekend starts now. Welcome to RealAg on the Weekend here on 650 CKOM and 980 CJME. I'm your host, Shaun Haney of RealAgriculture.com. Make sure you go to RealAgriculture.com for all of your news and insights on all the things that are happening in agriculture. And you can definitely subscribe to our emails that go out every single morning. You start off your day with all the things that you need to have top of mind as you try to increase the profitability of your farm business. You can do that by going to realagriculture.com/subscribe. Well, today on RealAg on the Weekend, we're going to hear from Greg Northey of Pulse Canada, talk about some of the impacts that he sees for this potential rail strike starting next week. Yikes. Not good, everybody. We're also going to hear from Karen Proud of Fertilizer Canada. There's obviously an impact from the rail strike perspective on fertilizer. And here's a little bit of a tidbit for you, I guess we'll call it, is that anhydrous ammonia is already not being moved by rail. And we're getting very close to the fall season where we're going to need this product getting in place for farmers to be doing their fall fertilization. Very concerning. Then we're also going to have a beef market update with Wasko, the Gateway Livestock Exchange. So lots to talk about here today on the program. If you have any feedback, you can send me an email, shaney@realagriculture.com. You can also find Real Agriculture across all the different social media platforms. You're also more than welcome to call the RealAg feedback line. That number is 855-776-6147. Now, earlier this week on the RealAg Radio podcast, we did our Farmer Rapid Fire on Thursday, and we talked to Saskatchewan farmer Corey Loessin from Radisson, and here's what he said about his crop conditions.
Getting really quite close to harvest. Well, closer than I thought we would be a while ago, actually. I mean, this heat has really sped things up. So yeah, I'm expecting by the end of this week, we're looking at some mustard that we seeded really early that's maybe going to be ready. Some pulse crops probably to desiccate the following week. And then wheat right in after that, I think. So yeah, I mean, it's a busy time, but looking forward to getting into the fields and just seeing how they turn out.
What's your expectation? Because we've had a lot of heat, as you mentioned. You know, when I talk to a lot of growers in Saskatchewan, a lot of them they're feeling a lot more bearish about the yields than they were, say, a month and a half ago. What's your expectation at this point?
Well, I mean, I've already sort of tempered my thoughts a bit in terms of crop stand and growth and relative to yield. But that said, I mean, our area was particularly fortunate with moisture. We even had some pretty good rains into July. So I'm thinking it's going to be still pretty good. But yeah, there's no question that the heat took some of the top yield potential off in every crop, I think. I mean, a lot of our canola was flowering through that period, and you can find blanks on the stem where the pods didn't pollinate properly. But overall, I think it's still going to be fairly decent. I hope I'm not really disappointed, but yes. You know, another thing I thought of, like, this is about kind of coming out of our third drought in our career.
Yeah.
And my wife said the other day, you know, how many years have we come out of drought and had a bumper crop, basically? And that's probably never. You know, we would have such a moisture deficit that we've made it partway back this year, which is really good. But we've got to sort of have realistic expectations as well.
Yeah, and you in a lot of cases, especially with canola, it's so hard to estimate yield, right? And so you really don't know until you get that combine in that field.
Yes, that's right, for sure. I'm very poor at estimating canola yield. we do have canola on our 1 irrigated quarter this year, which looks quite good, but yet, you can still find heat issues on that field, even though it was certainly not short of water. The heat still kind of caused some of the top end yield to disappear. But yeah, so we'll see. Pretty optimistic still, Shaun.
We were talking to Chip Flory, host of AgriTalk, about the markets on Wednesday's show. And one of the things that he mentioned about the spring wheat crop is, and he referenced North Dakota, pretty decent yields, but some of the spring wheat crop in the U.S. a little bit disappointing from a yield standpoint, but protein a little bit lower. What do you think some of our protein levels, are you worried about protein at all in the spring wheat for this year?
I'm expecting it to be low.
You are, eh?
Why? Because we had a big flush of moisture go through the soil profile, and we started, when we started seeding even, or certainly early April before it started raining, it was dry deep down. So the moisture moved down into the soil profile, likely took some of the nitrate with it, almost for sure, deeper into the soil. And then the other factor would be kind of shallow-rooted plants, shallow-rooted crop that then didn't likely access that deeper nitrogen in time to make protein. So, yeah, I'd be surprised if it's not on the low side, actually.
That was Corey Loessin of Radisson, Saskatchewan on the RealAg Radio podcast on Thursday. We just mentioned Chip Flory. We're talking about the protein levels, what we expect in Western Canada for spring wheat. Let's listen to that audio where Chip Flory of AgriTalk talks about what we've seen in the U.S. for spring wheat.
But wheat seems to be kind of in a world all by itself.
Doing wheat things.
Yeah, doing wheat things. The spring wheat crop is a good crop, but maybe just not as good as what they had anticipated. And then we've seen movement of Ukrainian troops onto Russian soil. We've seen a relocation of Russian troops away from offensive positions to defensive positions. I think it's a bigger deal than what the market has given it credit for at this point, Shaun. It for the first time in 4 years? Geez, I guess it is 4 years. For the first time in 4 years, it feels like the Russia-Ukraine situation could be a disruption to grain movement going forward.
Yeah, you mentioned not as good of a spring wheat crop as maybe some anticipated. I think that's what we're going to find out of Western Canada too, right? There was a lot of optimism about what yields could be 6-7 weeks ago, but temperature turned up, moisture went away, and I think the heat's going to have an impact on some of the crops. So but again, that a positive reaction may be short term. So be ready. Be ready.
Yep. And even in North Dakota, where the yields are good, the protein levels aren't great, is what we're hearing off the early harvest of the spring wheat.
Let's take a break here on RealAg on the weekend and dive into some of the potential impacts regarding the rail strike that could happen starting August 22nd, next week. Unbelievable. It has many people very concerned. We'll start off with Greg Northey of Pulse Canada when we come back. You're listening to RealAg on the weekend here on 980 CGME and 650 CKOM.
Since 2010, the Wheat School on RealAgriculture.com has been helping farmers to grow great wheat. Covering everything from markets, the latest research, pest and disease control, all the way down to on-farm trials, the Wheat School has everything your crop needs. Check out our massive video library on YouTube and grow great wheat with the Wheat School, brought to you by Syngenta Canada, C&M Seeds, and Alberta Grains.
If If you're involved in the agriculture industry, it's important to stay informed on all the latest issues affecting your business. At RealAgriculture.com, we offer fast, reliable news, information, and insights to help you keep on top of all of the latest in Canadian agriculture. Visit RealAgriculture.com and sign up for our free daily newsletter covering everything from news, agronomy, animal agriculture, and much more. Visit RealAgriculture.com/subscribe today.
Field by field, Maizex is bringing Canadian seed to farmers across Canada. Maizex is your source for high-performance soybeans and grain, silage, and grazing corn hybrids. Visit Maizex.com to find your local Maizex representative.
With the rail strike upon us starting potentially August 22nd and goods already starting to slow down in terms of rail movement, talk to Greg Northey with Pulse Canada to get an idea from the farm group's perspective on where do we go from here, what should be the solution, and what are some of the possible impacts if this strike actually does come to fruition. Here's my conversation with Greg Northey.
I mean, from our perspective, it's hard to imagine a potential labor disruption that would be more impactful on the economy. You know, both railways going down, there's no corollary. You know, it's hard. You have one railway going down, obviously impactful. You know, an airline going down, impactful. But both railways shutting down and basically stopping the Canadian economy. And this is something that I don't think we can understate the gravity of the situation for that.
From your perspective, cut to the chase, what needs to happen here? What are we heard earlier on RealAg Radio today from Kyle Larkin of the Grain Growers of Canada talking about how he described three options. From your perspective of Pulse Canada, your experience, you've spent a lot of time in the transport sector, Greg. What do you see as the path here for a resolution?
Yeah, well, look, you know, we focus on labor issues a lot, and a lot of it is in the realm of more long-term elements and how to prevent issues from happening, whether it's essential service or, you know, really speaking about the importance of back to work legislation in the event of a strike, sort of these more hypothetical long-term elements. This situation is very different. We know both railways have said they will lock out their employees on August 22nd, so less than 10 days. And so we have a very limited runway to prevent that. And so now it's about, you know, what we can do to do that, what we can do to prevent that, and what the focus should be. And so in our view, that the one pathway we have ahead of us here is for the minister to use the powers he has within the labor code in section 107 and actually refer what's happening in negotiations to the Canadian Industrial Relations Board. Obviously, we've just been through a process like that. That was a bit different. That was around whether there should be essential services within the rail that should be protected in the event of a strike. But at this point, we know there's going to be a lockout, and what we've been seeing is we're not fully sure that negotiations are happening in good faith. And so the possibility of a negotiated agreement is really unclear. It doesn't seem to be on the table. And so the minister at this point, with the powers that he has, needs to address that and use his powers to assess whether those negotiations are actually functioning right now.
And so is the solution there binding arbitration then?
Absolutely, it could be. You know, they look at it, and that's absolutely on the table. The minister could refer to the Industrial Relations Board, assess whether things are happening in good faith, and they could impose an agreement. They could ask for binding arbitration on an agreement. They have a series of different remedies they could potentially do. Our focus right now, for sure, would be, you know, the quickest, cleanest way could be binding arbitration, because it allows the two parties to still, you know, table their best deal and have a third party assess it. But binding arbitration, it has to be on the table for that, and as a solution when they look at it.
In order for that solution to happen, can the minister demand that's the solution? Do both parties, both sides, have to voluntarily agree to binding arbitration, or what happens here?
Yeah, generally, I mean, and this is where we start to get into gray areas, but I mean, our feeling is that this is the unprecedented situation means that, you know, all options have to be on the table. Is the two parties have to agree to binding arbitration. As we saw in the recent WestJet case, because that was a first collective bargaining agreement, there is the ability to actually impose binding arbitration. This case is different with CN and CPN and the unions, but the reality is it's never been tested in this way, and so there certainly are the chances of it, or the testing of the ability for the minister to actually explicitly say, we need to look at binding arbitration because this is not happening. The two parties are not coming together in the way that would represent an opportunity to actually have a negotiated agreement is not there. We want to see binding arbitration. I think you'd absolutely start to see an assessment of that against law, against case law, but I think the situation we have now is such that all these things have to be on the table. We have to look at this very seriously.
What are you hearing from members? What individual farmers that are growing pulses? There's got to be a lot of concern here based on, as you've mentioned, how far the two parties are apart, especially with combines rolling through the field. We're at a very inopportune time here for. I don't think there's ever a good time for this, but we're really at a bad time for agriculture.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, we've got peas being harvested now. Generally, those go straight off the combine and for export. And what we've been seeing actually in the Ag Transport Coalition numbers is that there has been a big, as far as demand, as far as trying to get orders on the books for the railways has been higher than usual for this time of year. So, the system has been gearing up for it. And August 22nd, like I said, less than 10 days, the whole system could be shut down. And it's not, it's deeply concerning. We've never seen something like this. It's going to be hugely impactful.
Is there work happening behind the scenes? Like, this is bigger than an ag issue. Okay. And a lot of times, Aggies, we stay in our little bubble and hey, this is an ag issue. And once in a while it branches out to another industry. This one branches out to all of them.
Yeah. Everybody.
Is there work behind the scenes happening cross industry in terms of how to collaborate in terms of moving this needle? Because we only have 10 days.
Absolutely. So, I mean, there's been a flurry of letters. Generally, labor issues like this result in a lot of letters going in, and so there's been collaborative letters across industries, across agriculture and everyone else. I've been sitting in meetings with departmental staff, with ministerial staff, with a broader coalition, really expressing how big of a concern this is. And I would say it's not that no one is understanding how big of a concern is it. It's just that. Like we're seeing with the railway and the unions, everyone's just sort of taking what we think is quite a relaxed view of this right now. And our point right now is that we can't be relaxed about it. And just from an agriculture perspective, we've started a campaign at stopthestrike.ca where we're basically trying to, we have a letter writing campaign. We're trying to encourage farmers, exporters. This is specifically for the ag industry, to write in and ask for action, this very specific action for the minister to take using his powers in 107. And so that's what we're doing in the ag industry. We're going to be spooling that up, trying to get other industries involved. But, from an agriculture perspective, we can speak with a really loud voice. Farmers should be very, very vocal about this right now. This is, like I said, massively consequential. Yeah. It's hard to be too hyperbolic about it, but it's a big deal.
I understand. But to be fair, we got 10 days. What good are letters? Like, doesn't the minister already have the awareness that this is a fundamentally catastrophic economic situation?
You would hope so, but I think the minister has faith, and we're not sure it's founded, that the two parties are bargaining in good faith, that they will actually, what they can do together, or the three parties, will actually result in a negotiated agreement. And what it takes, quite honestly, for the minister to act in something like this, to actually pull the trigger on a section 107 is voices, is industries letting him know that at this point it's not, he can't put the trust in the two parties. He has to act. He has to intervene in this way. And so, the power of a letter writing campaign in that sense, especially when it comes from farmers, can be quite significant.
That was Greg Northey of Pulse Canada talking about the impacts of the potential rail strike. And since that discussion, the Labour Minister McKinnon has said that he will not force the parties into binding arbitration. Hey, when we come back on RealAg on the Weekend, we're going to hear from Karen Proud of Fertilizer Canada more about this potential strike right after this. RealAg Radio is Canada's only daily radio show focused on agriculture. Get expert advice on Agronomic Monday. Tuesdays and Wednesdays will cover a broad range of issues. Thursday we'll hear from farmers across the country on the Farmer Rapid Fire. And we'll wrap things up Fridays with the RealAg Issues panel with Kelvin Hefner and Lindsay Smith. Join us Monday through Friday at 4:30 Eastern. And don't forget about the replay at 7 in the morning on Rural Radio 147, Sirius XM. Get all the information you need to keep your pulse crop healthy and profitable with the Pulse School on RealAgriculture.com. The Pulse School is a free YouTube video series covering agronomy, research, and more across a host of different pulse crops. It's also available as an audio podcast wherever you download or stream your favorite podcast. Check us out on YouTube or visit RealAgriculture.com. The Pulse School, brought to you by BSF Canada.
The Canola School on RealAgriculture.com is your one-stop shop for everything a canola grower needs. Check out our free video series on YouTube for all the latest in canola agronomy, research, marketing, and more. Don't have time to watch? Download the podcast version of the Canola School on RealAgriculture.com or anywhere you download your podcasts. Stay on top of all things canola with the Canola School on RealAgriculture.com, brought to you by BASF and Invigor Hybrid Canola.
This segment is brought to you by FP Genetics Hybrid Fall Rye, innovative seed genetics for Canadian farmers. Contact your local FP territory manager to discuss your fall seeding strategy and discover Hybrid Fall Rye's flexible end uses for marketing, milling, distilling, ethanol, and feed. Visit hybridfallrye.ca today.
So we've heard from Pulse Canada, get the producer's perspective. Well, let's hear what a certain group like the fertilizer industry thinks about the impacts of this potential strike that could happen on August 22nd. We talked to Karen Proud. She's president and CEO of Fertilizer Canada. Here's the conversation.
Well, I mean, we really need to get all parties, including our federal government, to get in a room together and agree, number one, we just can't have this strike happening. We cannot have both railways in Canada going down at the same time. There needs to be some resolution. I mean, we fully support collective bargaining. We agree that it's the best way to come to a long-term deal, but the government needs to step up and make sure that this strike is prevented. And they have the tools to do so. I think we need a willingness among all of the parties to resolve this.
There's a lot of, especially in Western Canada, there's a lot of fall fertilization that happens. Yeah. So give us some what ifs here. How impactful would both railways not moving cars, what impact would that have on the fertilizer industry and farmers?
Well, I can tell you, as of now, ammonia fertilizer is embargoed, because we fall under what the Canadian Industrial Relations Board sort of determined, products that might be of concern, and our products, because they pose a potential inhalation risk, the railways have embargoed those products. So the ammonia products are not moving today. So we may as well be in a strike position right now with regards to those products. And as you said, there's a couple of times a year where we really rely on the availability of ammonia products. That's in the spring and the fall. In particular, our western provinces are more affected because our eastern provinces bring in a lot of product from overseas, but our western provinces rely on the products that are produced in this country. And so if we do not have enough stock at sort of the distribution areas at retail for farmers, we are stocking up sort of now to replenish stock for the fall. If we don't have enough, it means we miss our fall fertilization time frame. And as you would know, and as most of your listeners would know, when it comes to fertilizer, we really need that unique window of time before a frost in order to be able to apply fertilizer and have it be effective. And if we lose that window, it means we're going to end up losing productivity next year. And then there's this sort of knock-on effect where if we lose productivity next year, there's an effect on production. That has an effect on food security. That has a global effect, and it goes on and on from there. And so I think it's not unreasonable to say that any of these disruptions can end up with a significant effect on global food security. There's not a tremendous leap from fertilizer application to food security.
A lot of times we think about rail in Canada, especially from the Western perspective, we think, getting product to port. But
yes,
there is also a huge component of getting product into the country as well. Farm equipment's a good example of that. From a fertilizer perspective, let's think about the going south component of this. What impact does this have on the American farmer and their access to product if these two railways strike?
Well, I mean, I think that's a great question. So we have, there's many facets to this. So we have the issues that happen in Canada. We've got, we're a huge trading partner to the United States when it comes to fertilizer. That product is shipped primarily by rail down to the US. US farmers are counting on Canadian fertilizer. We are an excellent source of fertilizer. Our members produce a fantastic fertilizer product. If we're not able to get our fertilizer to the U.S. farmers, it's the same concern. They need to replenish their stock. They're counting on Canadian fertilizer products. We have written jointly with our U.S. association a letter to the Prime Minister seeking assistance in this area, because the Americans are very concerned about the potential stoppage of our rail lines. And I'm sure not just on fertilizer products, but all products that we ship. And it's really important for Canada to be seen as a reliable trading partner. And when we continue to have these disruptions or even threats of the disruptions, we risk losing our customers. And if I can mention, there's just a great example where last year, when we had the Port of Vancouver strike, we ship quite a lot of our Canadian potash through that port. It's a very important port for us. Now, I'm sure you know, Canada is the #1 supplier of potash in the world. When we were unable to get our product out of that port, we lost customers to Russia. So every dollar lost from customers buying Canadian product goes to Russia, Belarus, or China. And frankly, it's not just a shame. You think about how those funds are then going to Russia to support other activities. It's really an abomination that Canada cannot get its product to the world that really is depending on our product, but is being forced to buy product from other countries because they're concerned about feeding their populations.
I think one of the impacts here too is, or the realities is, it's not like there's alternative modes of transport. You can't put trucks under all this fertilizer that has to go across Canada, has to go to the US, has to go to the port. It's not feasible. It's not possible. And I had an audience member that had suggested this to me. And, one of the things that I had mentioned was, well, if that's the solution in the short term, think about the emissions that are created from doing something like that, kind of in a joking sort of way. But it's not even possible. There's reason that we rely on rail. It's because of its ability to move product in such an efficient, cost-effective manner and so much volume at one time.
Yeah, I haven't done the math, but I don't think we've got enough trucks in this country to take all the product that was going by rail and ship it by truck. And that's an interesting statement because my understanding is the Canadian Industrial Relations Board that looked at this and was asked to look at whether certain products should be deemed essential, came to the decision that no product should be deemed essential and that there were other means of transporting these products, and they talked about trucking. Well, there's a lot of products that I think perhaps they didn't consider, although we made a submission to the board on behalf of fertilizer, but there's other products that it's just not feasible to ship it by truck. And you want every industry in this country to ship their products by truck? It's just not it. It's not a viable option.
From an anhydrous ammonia perspective, you gave that example earlier. So right away, farmers, because I've had a couple farmers ask about this very product. Are we in danger of some sort of a shortage situation in the short term here?
Well, it's been embargoed, so we're not shipping it. I don't know the state of supply along the supply chain at this time. I have not heard from my retail members yet that there's a concern about the supply, but we know that these products are shipped on a regular basis, and there's a reason for that. They're being sold overseas, they're being supplied into this country. When you end up with a product embargoed, like the clock is ticking now, and what we also know is that for every day that the product doesn't move, it takes 3 to 5 days to get back on track. And I don't want to cry wolf because I haven't been told yet that there's a shortage situation, but we can't rule that out depending on how long this lasts, how long the embargoes last, and what happens on the 22nd.
Okay, to wrap up, are you pushing for binding arbitration here?
We are asking the government to look at binding arbitration. We are also asking, and this is a longer term ask, is to make fertilizer products essential products where they must be moved no matter what. Our contribution to food security, I think, is clear, and our timeliness of needing this product when farmers need it is clear, and the government needs to step in and do something.
That was Karen Proud, President and CEO of Fertilizer Canada. Karen's example of the anhydrous ammonia already being pulled off rail. As we're moving into fall, that's when that product needs to be getting put into place at retail for you to pick up and to use as farmers in your fall fertilization plan. So there's an example of an immediate impact, right? This is going to add up very fast when it comes to some of the disruption and losses. And hopefully, from my perspective, Labour Minister McKinnon changes his mind and makes the decisions to force these two parties into binding arbitration. That would at least seems to be our chance at preventing the strike from happening. Okay, we got more coming up here on RealAg on the weekend. Up next, we got Ann Wasko of the Gateway Livestock Exchange to talk about what's going on in the beef markets. You're listening to RealAg on the weekend here on 650 CKOM and 980 CJME.
I'm Lindsay Smith from RealAgriculture.com. Join me Monday nights for The Agronomist, a 1-hour live and interactive show broadcast across YouTube, Facebook, and X. Monday nights at 8 p.m. Eastern, I host expert agronomists from all over the country to give you answers to some of the toughest agronomic questions. Join us live or catch the replay Tuesday morning. That's The Agronomist with me, Lindsay Smith, Monday nights live at 8 p.m. Eastern.
Hi, I'm Bernard Tobin, host of the Soybean School on RealAgriculture.com. Throughout the year, on the Soybean School, we'll bring you timely agronomic video content from planting to harvest, from the latest agronomic research to the latest in production technology. Check out our massive video library on YouTube, RealAgriculture.com, or download the audio podcast versions wherever you get your podcasts. The Soybean School is brought to you by BASF and Syngenta Canada.
It's been a pretty volatile time here in the beef markets as of late in Canada and the U.S. Well, every 2 weeks we talk to Ann Wasko, the Gateway Livestock Exchange, to get Ann's perspective on what is happening in the cattle markets. Here's this week's episode.
In both cases, lower, I guess, in a nutshell. It looks like we haven't seen much south trade, but in the north, 190 live caught most of the cattle so far this week. That's 3 lower than last week. Dressed sales in the north, 298. That's 7 lower than last week. And so with that, remembering that we saw Texas and Kansas last week at 186, I would expect we're going to see a bit lower than that this week. But also remember, we've been narrowing that north-south gap up. More cattle coming on in the north versus the south. And so it might not lose as much money as what we've seen in the north. So we'll keep an eye on that. The cutout last night, the choice cutout, closed just under 317. So looking back versus last week, that means it is up $4.50 from last week. And again, getting supported from the smaller kills we've seen of late. So that's the reason why the cutout's up a wee bit. The spread between choice and select is about $15 back. Again, pretty typical for this point in August. Locally, just bringing it back to the Alberta market, Shaun, we saw fat cattle. It looks like when all the dust settles, we're going to be off probably $7 to $8 dressed. $4.18 to $4.20 delivered is what I've been hearing so far. So again, when Canfax reports their weekly average, it's probably going to be down into that low 250s this week. If you're on the spot market, and again, yes, there's not a pile of cattle on the spot market anymore, but probably into the red for sure. Averaging break-evens probably around 260. So for getting cash cattle in the low 250s, you can do the math from there.
So this is where we got to be careful, right? We see higher prices or high prices relative to, say, the 5-year or 10-year average for sure. It doesn't mean necessarily more profit because the cost complex has increased so much as well.
Exactly. So even though we've talked about feed grain prices coming down and that cost of gain to put the pounds on is certainly lower than what it was last year, you and I both know, and the listeners know, what feeder cattle prices have done versus last year. So that's why that break-even is staying pretty elevated.
Yeah. A bit of a separation here between what's going on in the futures market and what's happening in the cash market.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. And again, the economic news that we've had out over the last week to 10 days in terms especially of the U.S. economic news and concerns of where we are in terms of possible recession, unemployment, all those things, putting lots of weight on all markets, including cattle markets and commodity markets. Certainly that pressured the 2025 contracts. People are kind of a, I'll believe it when I see it kind of, mentality, whereas today cash is cash. And certainly cash is stronger than what we're seeing in those deferred contracts.
Well, there's some, I don't know if it's irony, but what comes to mind is, this week we heard President Biden and presidential candidate Harris, Vice President Harris, talking about, mentioning beef as an example of, inflation at the grocery store and food costs being high and gouging of the consumer. Here's the reality. The economics is that as producers, we need the prices to be at what they are today, whether the consumer likes it or not, if we have a chance to scrape out a profit. That's the realities of the market right now.
It is. And of course, at all times over history, somebody's going to be making some money and somebody's going to be losing some money within our complex, right? And so today, for sure, looking at retail prices, they've been pushed higher. I think we talked about that 2 weeks ago. And whereas the cutout value, that wholesale price, is actually lower than where it's been. So everybody's getting a different piece. The argument today is the retailer's getting too much. So, but everybody takes their turn.
Next week I'm going to be at the Canadian Beef Industry Conference, and we're going to do a live recording of RealAg Radio. I'm looking forward to do it from the stage when we get an opportunity to do it, like we did last year at CBIC, and we'll do it again next week in Saskatoon. We're going to be talking a lot about trade. Can you give us a bit of an update on beef exports?
Right. I suspect convention goers are going to hear quite a bit on trade. So we did just get the StatsCan numbers for June out this past week. And certainly, remembering back to June here in Canada, of course, we had that big strike at Guelph. So that impacted how much tonnage, how many cattle we killed, how much tonnage was being produced. And so it showed up in the data. It's funny how it all works out at the end of the day. And so we did see smaller exports in the month of June by 7% versus last year. Year to date, they're still up 4%. So Shaun, June was the first month this year that we saw year-over-year decline in exports. So up until now, they've been up, which has been a good supporting part to our demand story.
If you want to hear the full conversation with Ann Wasko of the Gateway Livestock Exchange, make sure you go to RealAgriculture.com. Hey, that's all the time we have today for Real Ag on the Weekend. Good luck with harvest, everybody. Stay safe, and we'll chat with you again next week. This is Shaun Haney of RealAgriculture.com on Real Ag on the Weekend on 980 CGME and 650 CKOM.